Hello and welcome to FPS Coach. My name is Ron Rambo Kim, and in this video I want to talk about the mechanics of aiming. So what do I mean by mechanics? For me, I define that as how we can use our body, how we can position our hands and arm and everything else so we can control the mouse and essentially the crosshair. So I break down the mechanics into two segments or two major parts of the body. One is the aiming arm, and I break down into three sections of the arm, which is the hands, the forearm, and the elbow, which I'll go into more detail here in a few minutes. And then the second major segment of the mechanics of the body is the rest of the body. So you have your aiming arm and then the rest of your body. And because our body is a chain of connected parts, you need to keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out how to position your body, how to align each little section and angle to control your mouse. So I'll start by giving you my thoughts on the mechanics of using the big parts of your body, so everything other than your aiming arm. And I think this is an often overlooked part of the mechanics of aiming because most people are so focused on their hand grip and how their mouse feels in their hands. But I think in order to play games with longevity and comfort, you need to be able to position your body mostly in a really good posture. So if you're sitting down on a chair and the seat is either too low or too high, or the backrest is angled too forward or backwards, or the table is too high or too low, it's going to put your body in these weird, awkward alignments or positions where it could jeopardize the health of your back and posture, thus creating pain. And if you're playing games for a few hours and you start feeling your back get sore, well, you've got an issue. And then your subconscious is making these weird adjustments to alleviate that pain, and in the end affecting how you aim. So you need to be able to position the big parts of your body consistently, yes, always in the same positions, but more importantly in healthy positions. So if you do plan on gaming for long periods of time, you're in a good posture, and you're not going to have any soreness in your body. All right, so now I'm going to switch to the Skycam view, and I'll talk about the aiming arm, which is the hand grip, the forearm, and elbow. All right, so we're in Sky view now, and I want to start by talking about the hand grip and my thoughts and ideas and recommendations for how to hold the mouse. And I want to start by giving you an analogy. I think holding the mouse is kind of like drawing. And when we draw, when we hold a pencil or marker, our connection or our ability to draw depends on how well we control the tip of the marker, right? And the tip of the marker, you could say it's kind of like the crosshair. It's just a little small cluster of pixels in the middle of the screen. And because the marker and pencil it's a really simple shaped tool, it's very fine, we're able to pinpoint that tip of the pencil in our fingertips really easily. But the problem with the mouse is that since our hand is spread open and wide, it's very difficult to locate that small tip there, like on a marker at the sensor. So it's difficult for someone that's never held a mouse to find that hand to mouse to crosshair connection. So the goal of our hand grip is to be able to hold the mouse in such a way that we know exactly where that crosshair is, right? So some people like to hold the mouse where there's like air or a gap in between the palm and they use their fingers like this. Or there's people like me where I like to have my fingers more flat across the mouse and my palm overlapping more, and I lock it in place that way. And then what I want you to be cognizant of is the pressures in your hand and fingers on the mouse and the locations on the mouse of where those pressures are being applied. So for me, I like to lock my right pinky and left thumb. See how there's like no air or gap in there? I like to wrap it tightly on the sides of the mouse. So I always have this pressure this way, and I can't bend my arm that way, but they're pressuring towards the middle of the mouse. So it's locked in place, right? And then I overlap my palm and then my rest of my fingers. So I'll start with those side pressures first, and then my palm, and then the rest of my fingers wrap over. And then this is when I waggle. This is a term that you use in golf, where when you hold the grip, you start jiggling your fingers around and just kind of wiggling everything and closing in on the air gaps. And then eventually the mouse locks into place into my hand. And this feeling in my hand right now, where it's locked into place, is a very familiar feeling. It's something that I can replicate every time now, because I've gotten so used to holding it in this way. I know exactly how this mouse feels. Like all the contours, the little edges, the buttons. It's, I've practiced this. I've intentionally tried to hold my mouse in the same way every time. And then I, aim match and death match to build muscle memory. So in terms of how I pressure these three fingers into my mouse, I like to have this right pointing finger right here. I'm just flicking you guys off onto the right edge of this mouse wheel right here. This right here. So side pressure, right middle finger is just gently on the right side of this mouse wheel. And then this left finger here is it just drops down. And since I do the shooting and clicking with this finger, I have to be really aware of the pressure of this, the pointing finger on my mouse 1, because that's the finger that moves the most on the mouse and has the most movement, because it's doing the clicking. And then, anytime I'm aiming, I've got these side pressures with my pinky and thumb pressing in, and I've got this very familiar feeling with this middle finger on the mouse wheel, and then I do the clicking with this button here. So that's how I hold my mouse. In terms of how I've observed other pros and how they hold the mouse, there's infinite variations. There's players that have, the air conditioning came on. Let me turn that off 1 sec. Okay, I'm back. So in terms of how I've seen other pros hold the mouse, I'll just go over, a few variations. And just before I start, because aiming is such a feel-based skill, there is no right or wrong way to hold a mouse. It's completely unique for every single person. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to you figuring out how you need to make your little waggle adjustments, how you need to change the adjustments of where your hands and fingers are on the mouse and how much pressure you need to apply. It's completely a feel-based thing. Okay, so with that being said, I've seen pros where they curl this left finger up, and when you do that, the very tip of that pointing finger is pressed on that mouse, and there's a very fine pressure that you can replicate when this finger is curled, right? Like it's pressing down. And that's a very repeatable, very repeatable feeling with this finger. So You know how like I like to start with my pressures in my side fingers, my thumb and pinky. I guess some people like to, maybe they'll find this point and then they'll base their hand grip off that, right? Or there's a lot of players who curl their fingers like this, like that, and they have this feeling where they have all their pressures in their fingers on the tips, and they might not even have any palm pressure on the mouse, right? So there's a lot of this movement where how I like to hold the mouse where everything's wrapped over, there's not any finger movement. It's literally like mostly wrist and forearm, and there's not much of this movement, you know what I mean? There were some moments when I experimented where I would hold down my mouse 2. I would actually have mouse 2 pressed down the whole time and have that pressure, that feeling, which always, when I was just experimenting, it's not something that stuck, but just something to keep in mind. Like, again, since aiming is completely feel-based thing, don't be afraid to experiment with how you position your hand, your finger pressures, and all the angles. There's some players I've seen where they curl this left finger here. There's, right thumb, where like me, I hold it flat. They'll have it like pressed in, pointed here. And that's their comfort feel. That's their repeatable feeling. I've seen players where these 2 fingers here, so instead of flattened over, it's curled down like this, right? So it's like a claw tarantula feeling where these 2 are actually pointed, the tips of their fingers are pointed towards their palm. A lot of players do that. And when I have that feeling, there's really not much going on here on the last 2 fingers. It's a lot of this feeling. So I've seen that used a lot. There's people that actually curl over too, like this. So, there's just an infinite amount of variations of how you can hold the mouse. But again, the goal is just being able to find a hand grip that feels comfortable, finding the feeling and pressures that is repeatable, and ultimately allowing you to control the crosshair. So like having that hand to mouse to crosshair connection. And that comes with a lot of experimentation and finding a grip that you like, being able to hold the mouse the same way every time, and then finding a good sensitivity for this grip. And then once you have those variables in place, then you can start building your muscle memory and being able to really fine tune how to aim with your crosshair. So the next important segment of the arm or section of the arm after the hand is the forearm placement. So how much of your forearm is on the table? So you could see here is my elbow, right? Where's my elbow? There's my elbow. So there's 4 variations of elbow or forearm placement. So you could have, so there's some players that have their elbow and their entire forearm on the mouse pad. And then, there's something like in the middle where the table is intersecting the middle of the forearm. And then there's just under the wrist. And then there's some players that actually just don't have any forearm, and it's literally just their wrist on the mouse pad. So the amount of forearm that's placed on the table will have an effect on your range of motion. So what's your minimum and maximum range of what I call swiping? So right now I'm swiping my mouse pad. So say if I have no forearm on the table and it's just the wrist, well, my range of motion is very limited. It's only just what my wrist is able to do. And this is actually a fine way to play, depending on your game and like what kind of aiming you actually do. So one of the reasons I like this is that you're able to repeat it every time, because your wrist is in the same place that intersects at the table, whereas sometimes forearm placement, you could be off just half an inch or an inch one day, and that completely changes your feel in your range of motion. And again, that just goes back to the consistency part of the body positioning and alignments. So you have right now that my arm is in a straight 90 degrees with the front edge of this table here. Well, there's some players that like to aim their forearm or rotate their forearm a little bit counterclockwise this way. And, you know, one day you could be playing, or one day like, just be careful of how you angle your forearm. Keep that in mind, because I've seen, you know, one day if you're off and you're just rotated this way, it changes your feel completely. And then there's some players that actually angle their forearm this way. And the players that like to have their entire elbow on the table, I experimented with this too, and it's also really great because you always have this pivot point on your elbow on the table. And if you can keep that elbow in place, then you have like a reference that a feeling that you can always go back to rely upon on that consistent feel. And when that elbow is locked on the table, your range of motion is, well, it's the biggest or largest with this forearm placement. But again, it's, you know, because you got that pivot point always locked in place, your range of motion is always going to be the same as well. So say if I've got this 90-degree forearm to table placement with the elbow on there, well, that's a very repeatable position. And, you know, if you stick with it, I'm sure your muscle memory is going to build incredibly fast. So it's just something to keep in mind. The most popular forearm placement is one that's just kind of in the middle of the forearm. So it intersects here in the middle. I think that's just the most natural position. But again, sometimes you can just be a little off and you won't even know it, and your aim feels completely different. One last thing to mention in terms of the forearm, how parallel your forearm is with the floor and table is also a consideration to have in mind. So for instance, the forearm can actually be like, say my arm right now is, it's difficult to show in this camera view, I'll try to explain it, but my forearm and palm is flat on the table right now, right? But if my chair is too low, then there's gonna be more pressure intersecting my forearm right here. Like say if like just imagine that if your chair's too low compared to your table, there's gonna be more pressure on the front edge to the forearm. So my hand's actually like angled like towards the sky almost, right? Or vice versa, if my chair is too high, then my arm is higher than the table, and it's a completely different feel. So hopefully that made sense. It's just something I wanted to mention. Okay, the third section of the aiming arm that I want to talk about is the elbow placement. So the elbow, there's two things to keep in mind. One is how far the elbow is from your body. So, you know, is it actually close to the monitor, or is it retracted like towards your back, right? So how much your elbow is close to the table and how far it's away from the table, and then also how close it is to your body. So is the elbow flared out like this, or is it close to your body? And that makes a massive difference or a huge influence on your forearm placement and also your range of motion. So that's a very key component of the aiming arm you need to keep in mind. One of the things that I experimented with was actually keeping my armpits like tight and close to my body, and this elbow pinned to my body. And that way I would have no elbow flare, and that way that was my pivot point, and there was no flaring, right? So that was a consistent feel that I can always have, and have that pivot point on my body, right? So in other times I would experiment with flaring out and flaring my elbow out, and relying on that pivot point being somewhere else on the table. So something to keep in mind, the elbow placement. So if I were to teach someone the mechanics of aiming, someone that's never touched a mouse before, it's their first time sitting down on a chair and playing a computer game, I would recommend them 2 ways of how to find their body positioning or alignments. One way is to start with the big muscles and big parts of the body first, and then work their way down to their hands. So sitting down in the chair, rolling up to the desk, setting their height, setting the angle of their back, moving down to their aiming arm. So once their posture is set, they're sitting comfortably, then they grip the mouse. And then the second way of finding their mechanics is starting with the very small muscles, all the way from the fingertips to the big parts of their body. So finding a grip on the mouse where it feels like you have perfect control of that mouse, like it's just locked in and you know exactly how that mouse is going to move. And then moving up from your fingertips to your hands and palms, to your forearm, elbow, and then to the big parts of your body. And I just want to point out how important it is for you to be able to sit down at your chair and position your body in a consistent position, so that way you're holding the mouse the same way every time. I think sometimes, or for me, like if I ever feel like my aim feels off one day, like say yesterday I had the best aim of my life, I haven't changed any settings, I wake up the next day and my aim feels like crap, and I got good sleep, but just something feels a little off. Usually it's because the positioning of the big parts of my body are just slightly off in some way. So my chest might be rotated like, one way or the other, just a little bit more than usual. And then that changes alignments in the rest of my body and how I hold my mouse. Or if I raised or lowered my chair like half an inch and I forgot about it, or the backrest, then that changes everything. And even those the slightest change of alignments is going to change how you control that crosshair, because the crosshair is just like a little cluster of pixels in the middle of your screen. And so if your body's positioned a few millimeters here or there differently, that feel's going to be completely different. So if you want consistency in your aim, you have to be able to sit and position your body consistently the same way every time. So I remember during the prime of my career, I had built up my muscle memory to the point where if I went to the restroom or got a snack, I could sit down on my computer and find what I call my ready position in 10 seconds. So I could sit down on my chair and then hold my mouse and position my body exactly the way I wanted to. Like the feel was so ingrained, it took me 10 seconds to the point where I could live up during a match. Like I was ready to go. So like sitting down, making sure my posture where it's supposed to be, the angling of my back, how close my chest is to the desk, my forearm placement, the angle of my elbow, the hand grip, all that. Like all those feels were completely ingrained, and I could repeat it day in, day out. So I think that's the point that you're trying to get to, or that anyone tries to get to when playing an FPS game, because it is a challenge to be able to control those like few pixels in the middle of your crosshair. It's like just it's like a few thickness of a few hairs that you're trying to control, and being able to replicate how you control that tool, which is the mouse, you need to think about being exact in how you position your body to control that mouse to be able to control those exact few pixels. So hopefully this video helps. I know I went on some few tangents, so I just want to recap with two things. One is, you know where you want the crosshair to be in your mind, like you know visually like where it's supposed to go, how you're supposed to place it, where the flick shots and swipes are supposed to be. So trust your feel and your intuition of what adjustments you need to make in order to control the crosshair the way you want. And that could be the smallest little adjustment in your hand, rotating it like a ½ inch to the right. It could be curling your fingers. It could be applying more pressure. It could be changing the angle of your forearm. It could be a million things, but trust your feel and trust your hand-eye coordination to be able to make those adjustments. And then the second thing is once you do feel like, man, my aim feels great right now. Like everything just feels in total control, like burn that feeling into your mind and your body and take a snapshot of it. And that way, next time you sit up and you have to reset up again on your mouse, you've got those feelings burnt into your body and your mind, and then you can replicate it and then eventually form your muscle memory, which eventually gets you to your full potential of aiming. So thanks for watching. Like the video if it helps, and share if you have any friends that could use this tip. Thanks.